Hello, welcome to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. I'm Ruth Behar, the author of Across So Many Seas. Here we go, now in large print, as well as two other middle grade novels, Lucky Broken Girl and Letters from Cuba. I've also written two picture books, Tia Fortuna's New Home and Pepita Meets Bebita, which I co-authored with my son, Gabriel Freibe.
Mhm.
All my Kidlit books are works of historical fiction, and they focus on Latinx themes of identity, heritage, and the presence of the past. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight to be the moderator of our panel on bringing history and social justice to life. Before we get started, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator joining us, our school visit fund is back. You can enter to win a free visit from a Latinx author or illustrator for your classroom or library. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. So we're ready to begin. Our panel, Bringing History and Social Justice to Life, asks us to think about how we connect to historical events and movements that have happened in the long ago past and in the recent past. What role might fictional storytelling play in helping readers to make sense of the flow of time from the past to the present to the future? How can fiction lead us to a deeper understanding of different Latinx histories and social justice initiatives? We'll be hearing from three marvelous authors: Bessie Flores Zaldívar, author of Libertad, which I have right here. Here we go. Oh, there, that's better. Set in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. We have Mona Alvarado Frazier, author of A Bridge Home. Here we go. Focusing on the struggles of Mexican Americans for equal rights. And we have David Unger, author of Jose Feeds the World. Here we go. And a picture book about the Spanish-born chef, Jose Andres, who seeks to change the world through the power of food. Welcome, everybody. So let's begin by having each panelist introduce themselves, show off their book, provide a short summary so that our attendees have a bit of background and a foundation for our conversation. Let's start with Bessie Flores Zaldívar.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm Bessie. I was born in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, but I've been living in the US for the past 8 years. Libertad is my debut novel. It is a queer coming of age that takes place in Tegucigalpa, Honduras in the year 2017 and focuses on a high school senior, Libertad, who is queer. And Honduras 2017 is a pretty hard place to be queer. She has this massive crush on her best friend Camila, but not yet the language to really articulate that crush or even inquire about the parameters of their relationship, as is so common for so many of us queer folks when we're young. And her crush is also dating the captain of the soccer team, which is always hard. And as she's trying to figure out all of this normal teenager stuff and what life might look like for her after high school, if she should immigrate, go to the US or not, life is also happening. Particularly, a very loud and divisive presidential election is taking place in Honduras, which is based on the real events from the Honduran 2017 election, which was historic, as one of the candidates was the current president seeking re-election, which is illegal in Honduras. There are a lot of protests happening in reaction to this election, and participating in them is Libertad's older brother, Minor, who is a student front activist. Libertad herself, through the course of the novel, develops her own forms of activism through political poetry she's posting on Instagram anonymously. And at the heart of this novel is state-sanctioned violence and a lot of unimaginable loss that forces the protagonist to question whether she can remain in Honduras at all. So it's about the question of immigration. Her queerness obviously makes this even more complicated. Ultimately, the book explores themes of personal and communal grief, the way queerness can inspire healing, becoming, and reimagining love for a geography and its people beyond whatever we want to call a country.
That's great, Bessie. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next, let's ask Mona Alvarado Frazier to tell us about your book, please.
Hi, my book is A Bridge Home. It's set in 1972. It's the waning of the Vietnam War and also the rise of feminism. And also in the middle of the Chicano movement, and a young teenage girl is kind of drawn to the Chicano movement. However, her mother is not, because Chicanos in the Chicano moratorium have protested the Vietnam War. So it's a coming of age story where she's trying to find her identity as either a Mexican American or a Chicana, and how to use her voice in getting her community to solve a medical problem that they have.
Thank you, Mona. David, go ahead and tell us about your book, please.
Okay. Hola, buenas noches a todos y todas. I hope you're all doing well. I'm David Unger. I'm a Guatemalan-born novelist, translator, and in the last few years, children's book author. And I'm here presenting a children's book called Jose Feeds the World. It's about Jose Ramon Andres Puerta, the brilliant Spanish chef who introduced tapas to the United States. And it's a book that sort of follows his life. And part of what I try to do in the children's book is to illustrate how he found his own destiny, not only as a chef, but also as the founder of the World Central Kitchen, which has been anywhere and everywhere in the world when tragedy strikes. Unlike Bessie and Mona's book, the success of my book is based, I think, mostly by the wonderful work of the illustrator Marta Alvarez Miguel, who is a Spaniard who was born and lives in a village not far from where Jose Andres was born. So she put her heart and soul into the illustrations, and I and all of you are the beneficiaries of that.
Oh, that's wonderful, David. And I think the book is now out in Spanish.
Yes, it's called different title, called Jose Cocinero del Mundo, and it's just been published by Macmillan Castillo Macmillan in Mexico, and is already available in the United States.
That's so wonderful. And I understand you did the translation yourself.
I did. And it's always interesting to play around with differences of language and culture, and adapting the book for more Mexican, Central American audience, as opposed to there's a version coming out in Catalan and being published in Spain, and that will be a little different.
Oh, wow. That's exciting.
But I'm interested in hearing about the other people. I'm bored with myself.
Oh, no, not to worry. We're getting to everybody, but thanks for being conscious of that.
Thank you.
Actually, I want to now get into our topic of bringing history and social justice to life. So when did your book idea come to you, and when did this desire to bring history and social justice to life, how did that play a role in how you thought about your writing process, if it did, unless that maybe came about later at a later stage of your process? But when did that all sort of start to come together for you? Should we go in the same order, and then we can switch it around on the next question? So go back to Bessie to start.
Sure. I started writing Libertad in college, so just a couple years after leaving Honduras. And the desire to bring history to life was definitely there from the start. And I think the social justice aspects are more of like a byproduct of writing about history. It's really hard to look back on historical events, particularly quite recent ones that have a role in your life, and not applying a social justice lens to them. And it did play a big role in how I approached my writing process, because writing about history to me felt like it like a really big responsibility, one that has to be approached with a lot of grace and respect and empathy. And that materially manifested into doing a lot of research and also being very careful in interrogating myself about how I was doing that research, what sources I was holding as credible, and constantly checking myself for my own pre-held beliefs. Because having experienced these events, having had my whole family experience these events, there was no way I could approach them with an objective historical lens. So it just manifested into trying to include and at least hear as many voices as possible.
That's wonderful. I love that idea of trying to hear as many voices as possible. That's really wonderful. Maybe we'll come back to that in a moment. Mona, how about you? How would you reply to this question?
Well, about 6 years ago, when we had the rise of the book banning, which continues today, and some of the elimination of ethnic studies in high schools. In California, we're blessed because that's part of curriculum. However, in a lot of other states, it's not. And so what I was thinking was that there are so many high schoolers who can contribute so much to their community. However, they don't know what their ancestors have done before. So what I did is I took 1972 as the focal point, and I set it in a neighborhood much like the one that I grew up in. And I centered it on a teenage girl who basically just thought about herself, but she had a dream to go to college, but society was squashing that dream. So her quest is to find her voice, and she finds it by joining a Chicano group in her community. However, she's then buffeted back and forth between her mother's expectations, society's expectations, and then her own desires. So I wanted high schoolers to understand that one person can make a difference. And I did that by focusing in on this one high school senior.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, David?
Well, this is not only a children's book, but it's a nonfiction children's book. And I've really never worked on nonfiction books. But a friend of mine, a publisher named Mauricio Velasquez, who runs a company called Duo Press, he sent me a WhatsApp app message saying, would you be interested in doing a nonfiction book? And I said, it depends. Who are you thinking of doing it on? And he said, well, Jose Andres, do you know who he is? And I said, of course I know who he is. And I've always been amazed by his commitment to social causes and social justice, and discounting any of the particular political issues and just focusing on people. So my job was, I think, much easier than the job that Bessie and Mona had to do in terms of the decisions that you make. I relied a lot on historical published accounts, Googling Jose Andres's life. I think the creative part for me was finding the threads in his own life that, I don't want to be psychological about it, but finding the threads in his life that might have led him to become the person that he is. And what I liked about that is that that's what I do when I write my novels. I really try and understand how a character that I decide to write about becomes what she or he becomes.
That's so interesting. I'll just add a little bit about my book, Across So Many Seas. So I've been writing fiction now for about the last 10 years, but I have had a long career writing nonfiction as an anthropologist, so kind of the opposite of you, David, in that sense. And in the new book, Across So Many Seas, I was trying to write about 4 different time periods, 4 12-year-old girls living in 4 different times and in 4 different places. And it's about Sephardic Jews who are Jews of Spanish ancestry who were expelled from Spain in 1492. So for me, it was the challenge, could I write about a character in 1492 and then about various other younger characters who are the descendants of this character from 1492? So I set myself to write about that and to challenge myself and see if I could do it. If I could write about 4 different characters and see how they would all connect at the end of the story, and they all have this shared heritage that only becomes clear when you get to the very end of the book. So I wrote very much with a, very clear historical intention, and to see how I could communicate these different historical moments to a reader and have it all make sense somehow. And as I wrote, I wasn't sure how it was all going to fit together. So I wrote with a certain sense of mystery and kind of, expectation to see how will I figure this out. So it was a bit of a puzzle for me. So I guess related to that, you all talked a little bit about doing research for your books, and whether that was historical research or Bessie in particular, your family history. But I'm wondering about different kinds of research, different kinds of history work that each of you are doing, and how that plays a role in your storytelling, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, but to understand the role of research. And I guess to add a little bit to that question, how you then are communicating this research in your stories, and how are you making it accessible to younger readers, whether it's very young readers reading a picture book or middle grade or young adult readers reading your works. So let's switch it up, and let's start with David now. We'll go in the opposite direction.
Well, the research aspect of my work is more apparent in the novels that I've written, and not. I've translated 16 or 18 books, and the last book that I translated is Miguel Ángel Asturias's Señor Presidente, Mr. President, and that involved a lot of research because it's a novel that was set in the 1890s to 1920s and uses a very specific Guatemalan Spanish, many words of which have disappeared. In this book, the kind of research that I did was what I mentioned previously, is just, trying to figure out what might have led Jose Andres to not only be an amazing chef, but to be, like a volunteer in a soup kitchen, which he did, and to decide in 2010 that, he couldn't stay at home watching news reports about the problems in Haiti. And he just called a couple of friends and said, I'm going to Haiti and I'm going to organize food cooking and food distribution. So it was mostly just trying to figure out how he came to be who he was and why that passion has not flagged and continues to motivate him to go to places like Ukraine, and of course, most recently in Gaza. But he would go to Honduras. He would go to Chicano community, a Navajo Nation community, as he did during COVID. He went and set up soup kitchens and fed farm workers during COVID as well. So, it's just basically trying to understand the person.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. Bessie, how about you? How does research play a role in your writing?
Yeah, so my novel is not autobiographical, but has definitely a lot of biographical elements. And what that looked like was calling my brother, calling my sister, calling my grandma, and being like, what do you remember about this? How did this happen according to you? And getting to really experience it from their eyes, which was just wonderful and eye-opening. But less personal and more secondary research looked like going through the archives of how different events were reported on. And in Honduras, there's a lot of warranted suspicion against the media. So I would mostly look at this newspaper and headlines of events that I had been there for, that I had witnessed either as a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old, and then comparing them more so to the accounts of grassroots organizations that were affected by those events, right?
Mhm.
A big one for me writing Libertad was the Committee of Relatives of the Disappeared in Honduras, which is an organization that has been advocating for the government to be accountable for different activists that have been disappeared from the 80s, from 2009 when the American sponsored coup happened in Honduras, all the way to just a few years ago when the events of the book took place, looking at how they reported on that versus the media. And also the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations in Honduras is a big one, the COPIN. So just, it looked like a lot of comparing and contrasting how the people affected by the issues were reporting about it versus media organizations that in Honduras we know to be owned and paid by very specific families.
Oh,
Wow, that's really interesting. I love the idea that you were consulting with different people in your family and kind of getting their accounts and comparing and contrasting to what you found kind of in the archive, I guess,
Yeah.
and in your own memories too. Really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, thank you. Mona, what about you? Didn't know whether to call you in Spanish or English.
either way is fine. I prefer Mona.
You prefer Mona, then
Yeah,
definitely.
Mona. Um, like Bessie, a lot of it was personal. My mom was active in the Chicano movement. She was going to college in the late 60s and through the 70s. I was in school in the 70s. So that part of it was around me. I mean, I did call myself a Chicana. It's a more of a socio-political term, but I got that from my mom. The other thing is, though, I did have to research like what was going on in the larger community, not just my little neighborhood, but the larger community. So I researched in the library in the microfiche. I think that's what it's called, microfiche.
Mhm.
And that thing just made me nauseous going through, reams of that. It wasn't like the best way to do it, but it did help. The other thing I had to do, because I was not there at the Chicano moratorium in East LA, is I watched it on YouTube. I watched a lot of the PBS specials on La Raza, particularly the one on the Chicano movement, the moratorium, I mean, the entire march from the beginning of the march to the end where Ruben Salazar was killed. Um,
Mm.
I watched that about 6 or 7 times, and it was very difficult because in some parts I'm so angry, in other parts I'm crying.
Mm.
But just to see people being beaten for nothing. And
Mm.
so I was writing during the time I'm watching. I'm actually writing, I'm handwriting. Anytime I want to get into emotion, I have to do longhand writing.
Mm.
That works best for me. All the other times I'm on the computer and that's fine. But my research was then a combination of my own family, my neighborhood, and watching historical, texts,
Mm.
historical film, I mean.
Wow, that's so interesting, all the emotion that goes into connecting with this historical past. Mona, I guess to go on, we'll start with you now. Why was it important for you to write this book now at this moment? Was there a reason?
Um, I think what I had said before was particularly the book bans. People, teenagers are not getting the history.
Mhm.
That's the real facts. They're getting the perspective of the dominant society that's writing those history books and that curriculum. I wanted them to know these important people in the 60s and 70s who we all are on the shoulders of. In civil rights for Mexican Americans, besides Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, we also had Corky Gonzalez in Denver. We also had the Brown Berets, who the media vilified as militant and, and as criminals instead of community organizers, which were what they were. So I wanted teenagers to know that they have a rich history in community activism besides Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And that students actually led a lot of the protest, like in 1968 in the East LA walkouts. It was like 10,000 students who walked out. And that was also they could get Mexican American educators involved so they could hire more of them, and also for curriculum to reflect their histories and not just the dominant histories. So that's why I think it was very important then, and it's very important now that people know about that, especially Chicano youth.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you. David, what about you? Why was it important for you to write this book at this moment?
It was important because my friend asked me to write it.
Yeah.
But no, as I said previously, I've been very familiar with the work of Jose Andres for years. I've donated money to his World Central Kitchen. There's never been a children's book done on him, and coincidentally, Aaron Frankel, a children's book author, also published a book about Jose Andres at the same time as my book came out, and in a very comical situation. We were both introduced to each other and to each other's books, and there was an article that came out in Publishers Weekly, a long article about the differences and the similarities between our two books. So I think the moment is now. If you look at the world map, there's a lot of violence in the world, in Mexico and Darfur and Gaza. It's unspeakable. And, I think Jose Andres has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. There are few people. I think that Rigoberta Menchú from Guatemala got the prize in 1992, and she was emeritus of that prize. I think it's a good moment. It's a good moment for the book and for finding, heroes, not in the icon usage of the word, but people who are willing to do the job to make lives better.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Such a great role model. And you really see that at the end of the book when kids are thinking about career day and who they might want to be.
Exactly. How about you, Ruth?
Wait, let's hear from, I think, Bessie, and then I'll go next, and I'll
You have two questions to answer, Ruth.
Yeah, you're keeping track. Thank you.
Yeah, I really do want to hear your response. For me, it's my debut novel, so in some ways it just feels like the novel I had to write. It was the novel that felt most present inside of me. And it's a coming of age novel, which I think makes so much sense because as I was writing it, I was in some ways experiencing my own coming of age. I was experiencing being queer in the United States and everything that comes with just immigrating. So I got to write it from a place of a lot of questions about my identities and my relationship to this historical events and my family members relationship to this historical events and how that was different from mine. And it just felt right. But I also think that perhaps another reason why it was the novel that felt most urgent in me is because so many of the events in the book, even if they're historical, they are still happening in some way or another right now, not only in Honduras, but in the US. This has been a really weird year to have a novel that's about a presidential election come out. When we have the student protests happening in the United States last semester, I kept thinking about how my book is all about student protests in universities and how the government reacts to that. And how terrible that is. And then we had a presidential attempted assassination, which is also in conversation with my book. It's one of the first few events that takes place in the book. So unfortunately, it feels like the book still has so much shelf life because the events are still taking place, which is not my ideal. My dream is that in 10 years, Libertad is obsolete, that the events in the book don't make sense to us in the present.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's really interesting. Well, I guess I will answer the two questions now. So I did incorporate a lot of historical research into Across So Many Seas because I was writing about 1492 Spain, specifically Toledo, Spain, which was a site of harmony at one point in history of the three cultures, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. And so I wanted to set the story there. But then it's 1492, and the king and queen have decided to expel the Jewish community. They have the possibility of converting and being able to stay in Spain that way, but those that want to hold on to their faith have to choose departure. And so this character, Benvenida, her family, she's 12, and her family has chosen departure, but she has some members of her family, cousins and aunts and uncles, who have chosen to convert and to remain in Spain. And so when they're leaving, she's wondering if their family has made the right choice. Would it not have been better to have converted and to have been able to stay at home in Toledo? So she's, dealing with that and grappling with that question as the family departs and really struggles to leave. So the story is kind of about immigration from different perspectives. And so we have her story. And so I had to research what was going on in Spain in 1492. There's an edict of expulsion that I read and studied. And then there were chronicles from that time as well, from 1492, that documented this departure of this community. So I used all of that material to try to conjure the time and to try to imagine it from a young girl's perspective, since there isn't much written about young girls, 12-year-old girls at that time. We really don't have a lot in the record. We have a lot of records about the time period and what happened, but we don't really see things from the perspective of young girls. So I wanted to kind of fill in that gap by telling that story. And then we jump in time from 1492 to 1923 in Turkey. And Reina is the next character, and she's growing up in Turkey right at the moment when Turkey's becoming an independent nation. And she lives next door to a Muslim family. She's a Sephardic Jewish. She's part of a Sephardic Jewish family, and she's being taught old Sephardic songs in Ladino, this old Spanish that Sephardic Jews speak. And she's learning these songs from her mother, and she's playing the oud, which is a Middle Eastern instrument.
Mm.
And anyway, her father's very strict and has told her not to go out at night, not to hang out with other kids, and especially not with boys, and especially not with Muslim boys. But she disobeys, and she eventually gets punished, and she is sent off to Cuba with her aunt and is married off to a Sephardic man. She's only 12, but he will wait 3 years to marry her when she is 15. And then we go on from that story to the story of Allegra, who is the daughter of Reina. And now it's 1961. It's the Cuban Revolution. And she's all fired up with the literacy campaign and participates in the literacy campaign and, loves the revolution and loves Cuba. But then it turns out that her parents get in trouble with the system, with the revolutionary government, and she has to leave Cuba. And then we have the last girl, Paloma, who's growing up in Miami, and she's biracial. Her father is Afro-Cuban. Her mother is Sephardic Cuban, and they are planning a trip to Spain, a vacation trip to Spain. And Paloma finds out that her grandmother's last name is Toledano and thinks, well, maybe there's a connection to Toledo, because a lot of Sephardic people have the names of places, cities in Spain. And so they go to Toledo. And then there at the end of the story, there's a reconnection with this long ago past from Spain. So all of that did take a lot of research about Spain, about Turkey, about Cuba, and some research in Miami too, because the Miami story, the last story with Paloma, takes place in 2003. which is the year that Celia Cruz, the great diva of salsa, dies, and there's a big memorial held in Miami for her. So I set the last story, Paloma, at that time and in that place. So all of this took a fair amount of research, and then there was the family history, because the character of Reina is based somewhat, very loosely, on my paternal grandmother, who left Turkey for Cuba and restarted her life there, and very mysteriously was sent to Cuba by her parents and never saw them again. So there was kind of a gap there in the family storytelling that I wanted to fill in. So, so there's all that. And then why was it important for me to write this book at this moment? I started writing it during the pandemic. So I started in fall, like October of 2020. And so I was thinking about travel and journeys and how it wasn't possible suddenly for all of us to travel because of the pandemic and lockdown and everything. And so all of these stories started coming to me. And I was thinking a lot about immigration, and these are immigrant stories, essentially. And it just felt like the right moment. And I just started writing the story, and I felt I kind of owed a story about this grandmother who I really haven't spoken or written much about her, and just wanted to honor her by telling this story. So,
Beautiful.
so there we go. Yeah. So thank you. We're getting some very nice comments. So let's talk about examples of characters in your stories, perhaps expressing, excuse me, the wish to bring social justice to life. What can young readers learn from the characters in your books, whether they're fictional or non-fictional? Bessie, you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the biggest example in the book is my character's older brother, Minor, who is a student front activist in Tegucigalpa, so very much so against government. And his desire to join the fronts, despite understanding how incredibly dangerous that is in Honduras, comes from this feeling of being stuck. There's not enough change. Justice is not really a guarantee in any way, shape, or form. And he starts feeling very frustrated and just like he needs to do something. And what I found so beautiful about writing this character, and I think what I really hope readers take away from him, is that eventually what activism comes to mean to him is taking care of your neighbor, living where you live, a stateless love for geography and people that is not necessarily attached to ideas of nationality, but just to care. And the other good example in my novel is the main character, Libertad, who's writing this political poetry and who's very reactionary, as most 18-year-olds are. And at some point in the novel, towards the end, she asks this question. She's like, what's the point of staying here? What's the point of fighting this fight? Which I think we all often feel that way. And I think that at the end of the book, she also comes to learn that the point of it is you do it because what else are you going to do but create these pockets of joy for you and the people you love. But keep believing in taking care of your neighbor and living where you live. My characters really try to move away from ideas of heroism, of I am the one who's going to change the world, and more towards I am the one who gets to take care of these people around me, and that is an incredible honor.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Wow, thank you. Thank you. Mona, what about you?
Well, my main character is 17. She's a high school senior, very ambitious. However, since her father passed away in the Vietnam War, she becomes more of a loner and doesn't share how she feels to her mother because she doesn't want her mother to have more grief. And she doesn't share it to her brothers and sisters because she's the eldest and she feels that she should be the one in control. She's like the junior mom, which puts a lot of additional pressure on her. And I think that happens in a lot of families when it's a single parent family, is that the eldest takes on all these jobs to try to make it easier for the remaining parent. So I centered her in the neighborhood where she doesn't really communicate very, very much with anyone, because basically she doesn't want pity and she doesn't want to break down in grief in front of people. But she does learn that when she gets involved in the community, that she becomes more assertive because she finds that by sharing her grief with other people, that other people are grieving too. They're grieving different losses. One of her neighbors lost her son in the war. Another neighbor lost, her husband had a stroke and there was no medical access for him. So by interacting with her neighbor, she finds that she is not alone and that there's something that she can do, and that is to use her voice to communicate her feelings to her mother, to her brothers and sisters, and also to the larger city when she tries to get medical access into her neighborhood. So that's my character, Jackie Bravo.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Mona.
Mhm.
David, what about you?
Well, I think what I discovered in my research is that Jose Andres's both his parents were nurses, and when he was like 3 years old, 4 years old, he would often accompany his father or mother to the hospital, and he would observe how nurses and doctors and aides tried to comfort sick people. I don't think it was the food in the hospital that in any way attracted him to that life, but the idea of choosing a kind of career in which you are doing a valuable social service other than buying and selling stock in the financial sector, I think was quite important. So I think deep in his young memory mind was what his parents did. And also on weekends, they lived in a small village in Asturias. The mom was the one that cooked during the week, but on weekends, his father would cook a big paella, and many neighbors and friends were invited. So you can imagine like a huge paella pan, and having neighbors come and singing and dancing and relaxing. What brought them all together was the food, the idea of nourishing and feeding. We can't survive without vitamins and minerals and protein and carbohydrates and sugars. And so I think these two ideas sort of were kind of inculcated in his young mind, the idea of finding a career that might be beneficial to others, and also the idea of bringing joy to others through food.
Wow, that's so nice. All of these are so nice. I guess with me, I have these four characters, these four girl characters living in different times, different places, and food is important because it's part of their heritage, and it comes up a couple of times in the book. Things like eggplant that were eaten back in Spain in the 15th century, and they continue to serve them later on, and other foods as well, and baklava, which is brought from Turkey to Cuba. And Reina, as she grows older, is making baklava for her neighbors. So I like the way, like each of you in some way, we're talking about neighbors and conviviality and forming social communities. And I think with my characters, they're part of communities already, but then they form part of other communities that are not their own, and form these kinds of intercultural communities as they move around from one place to another. So I think that takes place in my book. And the four characters, what connects all of them is language. They're all connected through the Spanish language, but in particular, the form of Spanish known as Ladino, which is the Spanish that Sephardic Jews held on to. After leaving Spain, they continued to speak Spanish, and they added other words to the Spanish over time, whether it was Turkish or Hebrew. Other words became French, other words became, blended into their their Spanish, and that gets passed on in the songs. So song is a very important aspect
Mm.
book too, and each of my characters is into poetry and song, and that's one of the ways in which they hold on to their identity and their culture. So I guess that would be, something that young readers could learn from my book would be to see how these characters hold on to language, to memory, to food, and to song also. And so the songs are very important in the story. They become kind of a symbolic way of connecting with one another. So that's there. So what words of understanding and wisdom do you have for young readers who are struggling with how to understand the relation between past, present, and future? What
Mm.
might you say based on your books or your life stories? Um, Mona, would you like to go first on this?
That sounds like the hardest question.
Well, they're all hard.
Yeah. Um, I guess I think there's a lot of value when youth and children ask their parents, their uncles and aunts, extended family, about their history, about what they went through when they were kids, what was going on, to try to put it in context of their life story and how maybe something that they experienced could help them now. So
Mhm.
I think it's very important to talk to your elders,
Mm.
um, to be around them, to see them more as a whole person and not just like an older person or a grandma or a grandpa. Um, so I see a lot of value in just dialogue between children, teenagers, and older people.
Mhm. I really feel the same way about these kinds of intergenerational conversations. I
Mhm.
think they're just so important. Do you have just a follow-up? Do you have any suggestions on how young people might carry out those conversations?
To carry them out, I guess they would just ask questions of um, of their elders, or research in the library what it was like. Just pick any historical fiction that you want, and see what it was like for, say, a young female in the 1900s. What was it like when you were actually part of Mexico and now you're part of, you know,
Mm,
Texas?
mm,
What was it like in the, before 1848?
mhm,
What was it like in the 1950s when women were just starting to know that they could go out and have a job? There was more to aspire to than staying as a homemaker for their entire lives if they wanted to. So I think when you pick up a book, you really travel into different time zones.
mm,
And I think that that's the wonderful part of books and libraries is to reach out and look and find out about other cultures, not just your own, but other cultures, um, other types of societies. And I think that really helps kids expand their mind, and to ask, it might generate more questions too.
yeah, I love that. Thank you for
Mhm.
that. Um, how about you, Bessie?
Yeah, I love this question. It's my favorite.
Mhm.
I think that the first thing is to acknowledge that the way we have been taught to think about time has been shaped by colonial power structures. And
Mm,
so the first thing is that we think of time as an objective truth, the notion that we're experiencing time the same way all the time, which there's no reason for us to really believe that. And the second thing is that we think of time as an arrow, right? It's always moving forward, and the destination is the future.
mm,
But that's not necessarily true. And the ways we measure time, hours, seconds, minutes, years, these are all man-made, often Western concepts. I think it was the poet Morgan Parker who, yes, it was Morgan Parker. She was being asked about how time moved in her wonderful book, Magical Negro. And she said she often thought of herself as being in conversation with her past and future
Mm.
selves. Like she was always being visited by this other selves. as a queer person, I believe in something called queer temporality, the idea that queerness allows the body to experience time differently. You know, if you are a person who is trans and you get to experience a second puberty, what does that say about how you're experiencing time? Or if you live a lot of your life closeted and then you come out, you're experiencing other forms of coming of age. I've always, I don't know, I think it's really funny that we think of time as the future is ahead and the past is behind us. But the thing that we can see is the past. We can't see into the future, but we can see into the past. So isn't really the past in front of us, you know? So I would invite young readers to just challenge how we are thinking of time. I don't think it's doing us any favors to think that it's always going forward and that the destination is the future.
Wow, that's wonderful. It's so powerful. I love that. Thank you. And David, what about you? How do you think
Sure.
this
I
issue?
just wanted to say to Bessie that Garcia Marquez wrote a whole novel about that.
Yes.
100 Years of Solitude. It's all about circular time confronting chronological time and sort of the interplay of those two times. I also wanted to say that it's really impossible to be queer in Central America. It's almost all the gay queer people that I know from Guatemala and Honduras and Cuba also can't live in their countries. They have to come here because the prejudice is insurmountable. Anyway, I think one of the important themes of my book is that Jose Andres learned a lot about how he could prepare food for people by listening to what their needs were, whether it was in Puerto Rico, in Guatemala, in Haiti. When he goes to Haiti, for example, he starts making frijoles, beans, the Spanish way. And, you know, there are Haitian women around him who watch him, and when he gets the ladle and pours out the food and he sees that people who are really hungry are not eating, she says to him, well, you have to make beans the Haitian way, which is you have to puree the beans. And I think that kind of openness to change and to learning is very important. And I think Jose Andres is like a child, even at the age of 52 or 55, whatever he is. He is always listening. He's always learning. It would have been very easy for him, for example, in Gaza, to attack Israel very, very strongly for the death of so many children. And he saw that his destiny was to be, to provide food and to convert people into food fighters and not weapons fighters. Those are the things that he learned. And I think it's an important lesson to kids. And also something that Mona said about the elders, a couple of the spreads in the book deal with the Navajo Foundation and Nation and his serving of food and how so many elders were wiped out throughout the United States. The laws, no one has really written about how we've lost all our teachers, all the older generations that pass along information and knowledge down to the children, or many of them died. And then the idea of making a difference, that we can all make a difference. I have 5 grandchildren from the ages of 3 to 8, and I'm very engaged and involved with all of them. And the desire that all children have to make a better world is innate. It's part of who they are. And somewhere along the line, through education or through parental or societal or cultural okay, to use Bessie's word, oppression, a lot of that light is lost. So I think the important thing is to find your own light and then to share that light with others.
I like that.
These are all such beautiful comments. It's hard to know how to follow. I love the idea of nonlinear time, and I love the idea of speaking to elders and the idea of the light that young people, the children have, and their desire to make the world better, which is just kind of a thing that the children have, the questions they ask when things are wrong. They want to know why things are wrong. I'll never forget when my son was a young boy. I remember walking past a homeless woman who was sitting in the street with her child and asking for money. And I walked right by her, and my son, who might have been 4 at the time, said, "Mommy, let's go back and help this lady." And I went back and gave her some money, and I had walked right past her, and the way he had seen, that somebody needed help. And now I'm a grandmother as well, and I have 2 granddaughters, and very young at this point, 1.5 and 3.5. But the 3.5-year-old is asking lots of questions about why the world is as it is. So I take that very much to heart. I think something interesting happened to me is I wrote a novel for kids, and then a granddaughter appeared. So it almost seemed like I summoned a young person
It
into my
happens.
life, and then a second young person came as well. So that's been very exciting. So now when I'm writing books for young people, I'm writing them for young people, but some of the young people are my own granddaughters who will one day hopefully read some of these books, and some of them are dedicated to them, as this particular book is dedicated to my 2 granddaughters. So I think a lot about the stories that I'm passing on to them in particular, but also to other children. And I wrote this book in a very nonlinear, and it does have a circular structure where we begin, 500 years ago, but then there's still a connection to the present. When this family goes to Toledo, there's a connection back to this long ago ancestor, or somebody who might be a long ago ancestor. So I wanted to create a structure in the book where we could really connect past, present, and future, but in unexpected ways. That was very important to me. And then, thinking about the ancestors, I think about my ancestors all the time, and I was the kind of child, and I think my granddaughters will be these kind of children, that was always asking stories of my grandparents, wanting to know, because they were immigrants twice, from Europe to Cuba, and then from Cuba to the United States. And I was always so curious, what was that journey like? And, how did you get here? And, what was the place that you left? And I had all those questions in my mind. That's why I was asking you, Mona, about this. How do we get kids interested in asking questions about the ancestors? And I have an altar next to my desk. It's just on my right, and it's an altar with just pictures of my grandparents, and I look at them constantly as I'm writing. So that history to me is very much a part of my life. And so in that sense, I think it's very circular, because I really look to them constantly and think about them constantly. And so there's still very much a presence in my life and in my writing.
Beautiful.
I think now maybe would be a good time for each of us to read a section from our books. I have a few more questions, but maybe to break it up a little bit, if you want to give us a little setup so people understand the context, if there's a page or 2 you might want to read from your books, if this seems like a good idea, just so we can get a feeling for the text, for the voices in the text, for how you read your books aloud. I think that would be lovely. Who feels ready to start us off?
I'm happy to start us off.
Okay.
All right, so I'm reading from a few chapters in, and this is taking place on September 15th, which is Independence Day in Honduras. And my character is participating in all the marches and like events that take place on this day. She's at the National Stadium with her, in Tegucigalpa, with her whole senior class. The president of the country is there at the time. All these other schools are also participating and like just traveling to the capital to march in this event. And because the precedent is there has been all this sort of like whisper of, will there be a protest? Will there be any sort of like demonstration against it? All right, so I'm just gonna read from there. A Honduran flag stands next to the stage. I stare at it. I stare at its folds. I stare at its still folds of blue and white as the familiar instrumental music begins. We put our right hands over our hearts and open our mouths to sing the song about a loud ocean striking a naked volcano, and the honor it be to die for a land with a name. Serán muchos Honduras tus muertos, pero todos caerán con honor. When it's over, everyone returns to making visors out of their hands to shield their eyes from the sun. The sweat on my face makes my eyes sting. We melt as the schools in front of us kick off the parade and begin to make their way around the track. Trumpets and drums hurt my ears. Despite it being an open field, every inch of air feels precious and finite. Several schools are dressed in trajes típicos, the Honduran traditional robes, now mostly used in patriotic formal events like this one. I'm unsure of their origins. I remember Abuelo saying it's a mix of colonial influences, but mostly likely modeled after the clothing of different indigenous groups, like los Lencas. Boys wear hard cotton fabric pants, mostly white or the color of clay, and a long-sleeved baggy shirt that matches the pants in the same fabric. 3 embroidered ribbons in different bright colors run around the neck and wrists, making it look like they're wearing 3 long necklaces and 3 bracelets on each hand. A red handkerchief tied around the neck and a farmer's sombrero complete the look. But the boys look simple next to the girls, with their long dresses with skirts of multiple layers and colors. A single skirt can have a blue layer, a red layer, a yellow layer, and more. It's beautiful. No dress is exactly like another. With every other step the girls take, they hold open the edges of their skirts, like birds' wings in flight. The movement produces the illusions of color waves in the wind. The school in front of us begins to move, and finally, we get information. The marching band goes first, then the palillonas, and behind them, my group carrying the Honduran flag and banners we've been hand painting from the beginning of the school year. Every step is slow, giving the palillonas time to twirl their batons and dance around, coordinated in their movements. At first, I can't really see Camila. She's too far ahead. I try to stand on my toes, but that doesn't help. I keep bumping into the people in front of me and behind me. Finally, after peeking around bodies and angled arms between heads and flags, I catch a glimpse of the back of her head, one bent elbow resting on her hip. She's a natural performing, her hips and the beat locked as one. Sweat slides down my back and all the way down to my waistband, making my shirt stick to my skin. Camera flashes blink at us from every other angle, making it even harder to see anything. We make it halfway around the track. Someone screams, "Viva Honduras," and the rest of the crowd yells back, "Viva." The drums and trumpets are deafening, louder by the second, and the cheers still manage to ascend over them. So loud, no one hears the first explosion. That's the end of the chapter.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful reading,
Thank you.
Bessie. Who would like to go next?
I'll go.
You know.
I'll do. Okay, Mona, you're next.
Okay, this is a section between Jackie, the main character, who's a high school senior, and her mother on the way to work. And Jackie is keeping a secret from her mom, and that is that her high school tuition has not been paid, and she's on the borderline of being kicked out of school for unpaid tuition. But she doesn't want to burden her mother with that fact. We fly down the main street of Arvadio, which isn't busy because most parents go to work super early like Mom used to until her big break. She steps on the gas to get over the railroad tracks before the train backs up the traffic. The red blinking lights flash ahead. She jerks to a stop. "Mom, don't forget to pay the water bill at lunchtime." "I know." She glares at me when I hand her the bill, but we both know she'd be pissed if I didn't remind her. I hate bringing up the letter from Sister Mary Grace. Mom will bite my head off, maybe tomorrow when she's calmer. "The city should do something about this train," she says, "always holding everyone up." Mom drums her fingers against the steering wheel while the train lurches on the tracks. The schedule is so unpredictable that we never know when to cross. "Especially the ambulances," I say. "Cousin Bibi said a committee is asking the city council to make another street out of here or to build a bridge." "Oof." Mom rolls her eyes. "A group of her Chicano friends?" Bibi and Chicanos are a sore spot for Mom. Uncle Mario, Mom's older brother, said Bibi changed from a sweet, responsible daughter to a radical when she joined a student group in college. My uncle's a nice guy, but so traditional. He allowed her to go to the community college, but after a year, Bibi left town to attend a university 2 hours away. He threw a fit. He doesn't like the idea of his only daughter living alone. People talk. She and her friends protested the war, desgraciados. Those men died for their country. And those long hairs protest? It's because people are dying, I said. Bibi says the United States shouldn't be in. Are you saying your dad shouldn't have gone? That he died for nothing? Huh? Mom's glassy eyes widen. I shake my head and murmur, I didn't mean that. Those brown berets calling themselves Chicanos. We're Mexican American. You know, with the dash in the middle. Hyphen, not dash. Don't be a smartass. You understand what I mean. Well, Bibi doesn't feel like she's Mexican because she was born in LA, but she's not American either, I explain. She's from both places. She says the hyphen splits her in two. Calling herself a Chicana keeps her whole. And that makes sense to me. Most of the time, I don't feel half of anything, only pieces of many things. I'm the kid before Dad left for Vietnam, the kid when he was gone, and the kid when he died. Now, after his death, the pieces aren't half of anything.
Wow. Thank you.
Okay.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And I'm really intrigued by how all of us integrate Spanish into our texts as well. Wonderful. David, what about you?
Okay, I'm going to show the images from the Spanish book, and I'm going to read the English, the corresponding English.
That's great.
After Hurricane Dorian destroyed the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas in 2019, he realized that he needed to create a food distribution system based on what was happening on the ground. He could fly in stoves, generators, and pots to the Bahamas, but since the crops were destroyed, there wouldn't be fresh ingredients to cook with. He needed to find another solution. The answer was to offer MREs, meals ready to eat, including food like sandwiches and apples. Let's see if I can pull this off quickly. When the Volcán de Fuego fire volcano erupted in Guatemala, he realized he needed to find a way to get people who were in trouble to feel their own power. It's worth taking a risk to feed people, he said. He thought long and hard. He knew that if he could get people to use their skills, like growing corn or beans or shopping and cooking for large families, they could become leaders in their own communities and help others as they help themselves. The illustrations are magnificent, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They are.
Whenever Jose Andres goes to a new place where people are hungry, he gets motivated because he remembers his father wearing a white apron and cooking paella. Jose can see his neighbors, young and old, eating, laughing, and even dancing. And these are the elders. Over the years, Jose Andres has learned new lessons. In 2020, he set up a kitchen for the Navajo Nation during the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. The Navajo lived in isolated communities far from hospitals in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. They were very hard hit, especially the grandmothers and grandfathers. It would be terrible if the old people, the elders, were to disappear, since they conserve the heritage and memories of the entire Navajo Nation.
Wow.
I think that's enough.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you. Really beautiful part of the book. Let me see if I can read something brief from my book, Where So Many Seas. Since I have 4 characters, I have to decide which one I'm going to highlight. So I think I will read from Reina's story, which is the second, which is the one inspired by my grandmother. It's again not the actual story of my abuela, but inspired by the mystery of the way she was sent to Turkey and from Turkey to Cuba and never saw her parents again. So this is a sad chapter. It's called To Me You Are Dead. I bring in the clean laundry and find the house filled with the aromas of Papa's favorite foods, which Mima is preparing for dinner. The agristada soup with just the right mix of lemon and egg. The dolmas made from tomatoes filled with rice and meat and a bit of parsley, and the sweet eggplant dish, the berenjenas con miel, that he especially adores. Mima has also made baklava for dessert, and it's soaking up the sugary syrup she has poured over the flaky layers of pastry and walnuts. Papa sits at the head of the table as always. Mima serves him first and gives him the largest portions. Then she serves each of us in turn and finally serves herself. Everything is delicious, cooked to perfection, Papa says. Mima smiles. I'm glad you enjoy it. Then I help Mima clear the table and serve the plates of sweet baklava. All is peaceful until Papa eats his last bite. Then he wipes his mouth with his napkin, and suddenly his expression changes. He looks at me with disgust, and I know I am in trouble. He sends my sisters to our room and turns to me coldly. I heard you were in the street last night, Reina, that you were with Sadiq, that you had the nerve to bring your mother's oud to the seaport and sing songs for the neighborhood boys. Didn't I forbid you from going out? How did you dare to disobey me? You have shamed yourself, Reina, and you have shamed your family. I wait for him to slap me, but what comes feels worse than that. My father looks at me as if I am nothing and says, "You are not my daughter anymore. To me, you are dead." I can't believe I am hearing such harsh words from my own father. Papa, I did nothing wrong, I start to explain, but he will not listen. He just stands up and walks to his and Mima's bedroom and shuts the door. He says I am no longer his daughter, which means I no longer have a father. I think about how Mima says that I came into the world carrying a bundle of sadness. Now I have more than a bundle to carry. I have a boulder. I will carry the weight of his proclamation with me always, but I am determined to stay alive. I will not let that boulder crush me.
Thank you.
All right, so we still have a little time. So before ending, we have two wonderful questions from two educators. So let's see if we can get to answer these. So from Shirley Shiley, an educator in Woodbridge High School, Delaware, she asks, what strategies, resources, or methods do you recommend using to sensitively teach about these topics using these books in our classrooms? Mona, would you like to start?
I think there's quite a few books about, protest and civil organization. I was going to say civil disobedience, but it's not disobedience. That's just a word somebody else uses to oppress the protesters, right? So I think I would look at books like In the Time of the Butterflies about the Medieval sisters against the dictator. I mean, these are young girls against, a cruel dictator. I think it was the Dominican Republic. Also, the revolution of Evelyn Serrano, I think. It was about the Young Lords organization in the 60s and 70s in New York. Let's see. All the Stars Denied by Guadalupe Garcia Marcal. These are all teenagers who found a way to communicate their dissatisfaction with the status quo and about the oppression of their civil rights. So I think you can teach about protests to kids in a way where it's, nonviolent protest. And there's a lot of examples about teenagers who have protested. And I think that's a topic that a lot of parents don't want to talk about because they're afraid that their kids are going to get, jailed or receive a ticket or whatever. But I think it's still important to teach about peaceful protest to teenagers. So by using those books, and I'm sure there's others, Bessie's book, there's different options too, right? Like David talked about, that's a type of protest that the chef is doing because he's using a humanitarian effort as part of his contribution to making things better. So I think there's so many ways that you could tackle that topic in a classroom situation.
Thank you. That's wonderful, Mona. Thank you so much. Bessie, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Just like Mona, I think that there's many books that you can put this in conversation with. But something that's, I think, really fascinating about Libertad is that so many of the events have continued to develop after the book ends. At the end of my book, my character is pretty certain that the president at the time, Juan Orlando Hernandez, will always be in power, that will never change. But by the time I finished writing the book, that wasn't true anymore. He had been extradited to the US under charges of drug trafficking. And that didn't fix everything. Now the current government is also incredibly difficult to deal with. So I think that a good way to approach this book, a good strategy and a good resource is to just look at what happened after, look at what happened before. All the organizations that I mentioned before, the committees for the disappeared for the indigenous people of Honduras are active and are always putting out more and more resources that relate to everything that's going on in the book. And for young people in particular, I think that I always try to mention that I wrote this book from a lot of questions about coming of age and my place in the world. And I think approaching this book the same way might make it mean more. I think asking young readers, what questions do you have about your own coming of age that feel unanswerable, that you might want to write from, would help contextualize the events in the book.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think thinking from that point of view of coming of age seems very, very helpful. Yeah, thank you. David, what about you? What resources do you recommend?
I want to focus a little bit on Sarah's question, which makes me realize that it's a real challenge being an educator and a librarian in 2024, that you have to worry about the idea. I'm focusing on the word sensitively teach, so is the question like, how do you talk about these subjects in a way that the community, the parents, or the administrators don't get offended? Is that the question? Or is it that the kids might not be able to handle the issues that are being discussed? Because if it's a question of the kids being able to handle it, I don't think that's ever a problem. I think that that kids, again, sort of innately can deal with death, can deal with tragedy, can deal with protest, civil obedience. Maybe Bessie's book about gay love might be a little bit more difficult and touchy, but I'm really wondering what the word sensitively teach goes to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In my case, because I have so many different historical periods in the book, 4 different ones, I did work with a specialist in Sephardic studies, Hannah Pressman, to create an educator guide. So we have an educator guide that is on my website and easily accessible, and offers a lot of background, a lot of historical resources, offers methods too on how kids might talk to their elders about their histories. So it's very specific about the book, but also offers more general ideas on how to think about history and how to engage kids in interviewing elders so that they can learn about their own history. I also created a playlist for my book because songs are so important, these old Sephardic songs. So you can go to my website as well, and I have a playlist of the songs that are mentioned in the book, so you can also hear them and learn the lyrics if you want to. So I'm really aware of resources that teachers might be able to use, that kids might be able to use. I think that's really important, and I've tried with all of my middle grade novels, the three of them, to always create an educator guide so that I can offer some help and a glossary and things like that to help educators and librarians. So we have very little time left, but I'd love to just maybe quickly ask you the last question from Dr. Carla España, an educator in New York, who asks, which book would you put in conversation with your book? Maybe we could just quickly go around the room here and see which book that might be. Bessie, do you have a book that you would put in conversation with your book?
Yes, Patron Saints of Nothing, which is also a coming of age novel by Randy Rebate. That is the book that helped me write my book. So I think it feels like, to me, it feels like they're existing in the same world, and they're both dealing with themes of immigration, of activism, of digital activism, and family history, feeling differently from your family about different historical events. So that's the one for me.
Lovely. Thank you. Mona, what about you?
I think it would be The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. Let's see, it's by Sonia Manzano. And that talks about the Young Lords group in New York in the 60s and 70s, who also did a lot of community outreach, just like a lot of the Chicano organizations did in the schools, in their community, trying to get access to better services. So I think those two items, one's West Coast, and which is mine, and one's East Coast, which is Sonia Manzano's.
Nice. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. David, what about you?
Yeah, I would just suggest that people look at Aaron Frankel's A Plate of Hope, which is the other book that was written about Jose Andres, which was sort of sanctioned by him. Mine is completely unsanctioned. But yeah, I think that's what I would say. And, in general, I would just say that I have a friend who writes in English and Spanish, Lauren Schimmel, who has written a lot of books and translated a lot of books. His most recent book is with Carlos Pintado, is that his name? Yes, from Miami, about Cuban haikus. But most of his books deal with gay issues, and books that he writes and that he translates. I mean, that's his dedication. And I think that he treats issues that that educators, especially in elementary and middle school, might walk gingerly over, would benefit from looking at the work that Lawrence has done.
That's great. I mean, I can think of several books for me, but I think maybe the one important one that is definitely a book that inspired me quite a lot is Alan Gratz's book, Refugee, which is told from the perspective of three different children. I think that book inspired me to think about writing from the perspective of different people in the same book and connecting three different refugee or immigrant stories. I think that one would be the one that I'd put most closely in conversation with my book. And I'm also very grateful and inspired by the work of Margarita Engel, who's also an author, and her new book, Wild Dreamers, is wonderful, but I've loved all of her books and have really, looked up to her as a mentor in this field. I think we're coming to the end of our time. So I want to thank our amazing authors for sharing their insights in this Latinx, Kidlit Book Festival virtual event. I hope you've all enjoyed our discussion today. It's our hope that you've heard new and exciting ideas on bringing history and social justice to life. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the Bringing History and Social Justice to Life panel at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Gracias to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What I really love about our conventions are my colleagues and the people, and making connections with people that I see every year, year after year. But I always meet new people and make new connections, get new ideas. So there's nothing better than that.
I enjoyed the networking opportunity, the experiences that I had in the sessions that I went to have been wonderful as well.
I'm excited to go back to my district and share what I've learned. I also know even more about poetry, which is my passion.
I think one of the most wonderful things that I love to see is when people hug and connect. I mean, it's just that energized feeling and passion that everyone gets when they get to see each other every year.
You're gonna be surprised how much this space is for you. And it's different than any other convention. I go to a lot of conferences and conventions, and I'm gonna say, if you are an ELA teacher, or writer or author, book writer, but specifically ELA teacher, you need to be here. There is no other convention for us.